Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And this year's Nobel Prize for Physics has been awarded this week to scientists who worked on the formation of black holes. It's a shame they had to leave one inside Boris Johnson's head, but there you are. In other news, Tory party conference, Boris Johnson given his headline speech, and he has been echoing the words of Home Secretary Priti Patel in inciting hatred against the legal profession in the UK. It is an unseemly and wholly inaccurate portrayal of lawyers, and it is going to end up with something terrible happening. And what will Johnson do about it then, assuming he's still in power? Double down on his rhetoric, of course, and say how important it is to keep the very people creating the climate under which these attacks happen in power. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, amongst other things that the Conservative leader has been saying to the party faithful at the conference, albeit not really faithful to him, it would seem, by the polling figures, Boris Johnson drew on spurious Second World War analogies in order to justify his destruction of the UK in modern times. I mean, if you were doing a Tory party conference bingo, that would have been on it, wouldn't it? You know, Second World War, Blitz spirit, all that. He also challenged anyone who thought he was fit for government to... if you were saying, oh, he's not fit after COVID, he never really recovered, he challenged you to an arm wrestle. So, good job we have grown-ups in charge in number 10 Downing Street, isn't it? He made ridiculous claims about power generation. In 10 years' time, he said, offshore wind will power every home in the country. Of course, he presumably had to emphasise the offshore bit, because there's nothing that small-minded little Englander Conservatives like more than complaining about bloody wind turbines. Oh, but if they're offshore, that's fine, apparently. That's okay. They don't mind that. Good to know. Good to know. Naturally, the concept is ridiculous. We have a great deal of scope for expansion of wind energy in the UK. Ironically, just this week, that is what I'm covering with my students. Lots of suitable places. We've got lots of empty spaces, particularly in Scotland. And we're a coastal nation. We've got lots of scope for expanding offshore wind. Absolutely. And we absolutely need to. And we can absolutely massively increase the amount of renewable energy we get from wind. But this suggestion that it will power every home in the country is, of course, spurious nonsense. They can contribute much more to our needs, but they cannot meet them. Wind power is unreliable. In scientific terms, that means we cannot match demand with wind alone, because it will not always be peak windy when we have peak demand. But accuracy is not one of Johnson's strong points. But the most vile inaccuracy may have been, say, for his attacks on the law. Because I'm not going to complain about what he said about wind power. At the end of the day, he's talking about a massive expansion of wind power. Good. That's good. It's the only good part of the speech, quite frankly. But the leader of the so-called party of law and order has attacked people this week, the very people who make it all work. Boris Johnson wants to remove our human rights, and he will do so. Even if he's replaced before too long, I see no reason why his successor would not forge ahead with that particular plan. Human rights are not something that is a particular bugbear of Boris Johnson. It's not that he is particularly aggrieved about it. It's not even just about Dominic Cummings. It inconveniences modern Conservatives in general. They don't like them. They don't like rights. They don't need them themselves. They're wealthy enough to get by without them. Any of the potential successors to Johnson would absolutely seek to throw our rights onto the bonfire of Brexit, to rapturous applause amongst those who voted them into office. When you have absolutely no moral boundaries and a media that will largely sell anything you have to offer, you can convince a vampire that sunbathing would be a great idea. And speaking of vampires, Johnson actually matched Priti Patel's words in attacking so-called lefty human rights lawyers and other do-gooders. Actual words there. Actual words. So before getting on to the dangerous rhetoric about lawyers, there's that negative comment again, just like from Patel, about do-gooders. So now it isn't just the Home Secretary, but the Prime Minister himself who is on record as saying that people who do good are the enemy. I mean, I know Margaret Thatcher tried to redefine what good meant. She might almost have inspired the Gordon Gekko's greed is good mantra. She certainly took it on board. Boris Johnson bins the concept altogether. If you do good, you're a commie. You've got no place in the party or his vision for Britain. Woe betide any Conservatives that ever engage in any charitable work. You are now the enemy. Well done. But there we are. But then there was the far more dangerous attacks on lawyers. He lied about the way criminal justice works, blaming lawyers for protecting asylum seekers, who are also the enemy. There's lots of enemies in this speech. And supporting others who would again challenge the government. More enemies, my goodness. Missing out the crucial bit of information that lawyers do not make the laws. They don't decide what happens. They use the laws. It is the government who make the laws. It is Parliament, I suppose. Well, at the moment, it isn't Parliament. It is just the government. Lawyers cannot successfully argue cases without the legal tools to do so. If the government is found in court to have broken the law by so-called lefty human rights lawyers, or activist lawyers as they were called a few weeks ago, then it is because the government have broken the law of the land, their own law. It's that simple. And the government know this. They will also know that this dangerous rhetoric, now making lawyers the enemy, could result in extremists getting so worked up that they inflict violence on a human rights lawyer. Or indeed any lawyer identified as having challenged the government or indeed anything. They already receive threats. Prominent human rights lawyers already receive a great many threats. It may only be a matter of time before someone acts. Incidents like this are mercifully rare in the UK compared to, for example, the United States. Largely, you would think, due to the relative lack of availability of weapons. Even Conservatives in this country are not immediately minded to arm dangerous lunatics just yet. But they seem to have no problems in innocent people being attacked if it helps distract from their own incompetence. And that is all this is. Johnson's speech was light on both Brexit and COVID. In the case of Brexit, yeah, he likes talking about Brexit. The moment the chickens haven't come home to roost, he loves it. But at the same time, he is probably wary at this late stage of saying too much that can be used against him very shortly. And as for COVID, he'd rather not mention it at all. No wonder. Look at the situation now. Look at this graph. This is our cases now. This is where we are. The way it was looking before they found all those results they lost, you almost thought, Mel, it was getting to what might be a plateau, might even be a peak. Maybe we've got to the peak. We sort of knew we probably hadn't, but maybe. No chance of that. Look at this now. Look at it. Of course he doesn't want to talk about COVID, but he had to talk about something. So he creates monsters, like all right-wing extremists. I suppose left-wing extremists do as well. He invents an enemy to protect the people from. He talks about what a mess the country is in, despite having been in power for over a decade, and how he's going to somehow put it all right within the next few years. But of course he won't. The Conservatives have made the country objectively worse in the last decade. Worse off economically, wider gap between rich and poor, less effective NHS, fewer police, more people in poverty, smaller military, much less influence internationally, and performing worst in the world in terms of advanced nations when it comes to the combination of health and the economy in dealing with COVID. The Conservatives' legacy is a wall-to-wall disaster. So the current leader has to make up something imagined, some threat that he can protect us from. Has to be a made-up threat, like Brexit. COVID was no good. It's not a made-up threat. It can't protect us from that. It can only protect us from threats that don't actually exist until he inflicts them upon us. But those pesky human rights lawyers stopped him. We shouldn't worry, of course. You know, it's not like the human rights he's going to protect us. I mean, they only protect the enemy, apparently. You don't need them. Decent people don't need them. So we're not going to miss them when they're gone. But he had no actual plan to make things better. It's not immediately obvious to me how removing even more of my rights is going to make things better. His plan might even be magic. Not actually kidding, that's the word he used. The word he used when talking about dealing with care homes was magic. He said that he would use magic to help millions in need in the care sector. Probably one of the more honest parts of his entire speech. But there it is. This is what we have. This is where we're headed. Divide and rule, of course, requires that everyone turns on each other instead of supporting one another against the tyrant. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.